I'm Dr. Stephen Gray. I'm a lecturer in British and Imperial History in the Department of History and Classics. My research is generally into the late 19th century British Empire. I'm particularly interested in the connections between the British Empire and the Navy, and particularly interested in the networks that the Navy makes between Britain and between colonies, particularly social and cultural encounter between sailors in foreign lands. So I currently teach on several different modules. I coordinate a third-year special subject on the British Empire. I also coordinate a second-year course on war and British society between 1688 and 1815. I've also taught on MA modules, again teaching the British Empire, and I've also taught single lectures on survey courses for the first year, looking at British Empire, British overseas trade, and British expansion in general. I certainly try to be, but standing in front of a class is often quite difficult to actually tell how enthusiastic you're coming across as. So this is where student feedback is really important, and generally in the feedback I have received, students do feel that I have a passion for the subject, so hopefully that's coming across. Well, I think it's a lot easier to be enthusiastic when you're teaching something you are very interested in yourself, and the sorts of things and sources that you use in your own research certainly helps you to be enthusiastic towards the students. I like to get students to interact and to choose sources themselves. So, for instance, in the master's class, I got them to choose an image that they thought represented the British Empire, to bring it along and to discuss why they thought it was an important image. I also like to break students into groups and to get them to discuss things together, so they're able to bring across their own ideas and discuss them without fear of being on their own. I also like to include my own research in my teaching, and I find that obviously, because I have first-hand experience of the sources, that you can add colour to your lectures with stories and anecdotes from sources that you read, and you can add images and other things like that to really sort of add to the general lecture. I do think it's quite important though that you explain why this matters. Obviously it's not always clear to students why you do certain parts of your research, so it's very important so the student comes away understanding why you've told them about various different things. I always try to be. I don't think it's always possible to be. Certainly when you're ill, you're tired, or you have a lot of other things going on in the background, sometimes it's difficult to be quite as enthusiastic as you'd like to be. I also teach lectures last thing on a Friday and first thing on a Tuesday and Thursday, so sometimes it's hard to motivate yourself, but also when your students come into the lecture theatre or the seminar room and slump into their chairs and look glazed over before you start, it's often quite a challenge to try and be very enthusiastic about what you're teaching. Another time I suppose it's hard to be enthusiastic is when you're teaching something that perhaps you're not quite as familiar with, it's outside your own research interests, and that makes it quite hard to use the sort of same approaches that you might do with your own research, where you can tell stories or interesting little anecdotes about it when you don't really know the material quite as well. I wouldn't say unenthusiastic, but sometimes, as I've already said, it's a lot easier to be enthusiastic when you're receiving enthusiasm back from your students. Perhaps, again, when teaching last thing on a Friday and trying to go through the intricacies of the British banking system or taxation, it's not quite as easy to be as enthusiastic as when perhaps I'm teaching about the cultural history of the Navy, for example, something I work on. But then I think it's important to think about that beforehand, think about the circumstances of that lecture. For example, with the taxation lecture, I put caricatures into the slides to try and liven it up a bit, what is obviously quite a dry subject, to try and help the students understand the way that it was viewed at the time. I think certainly in seminars you get a lot more of a feel for the enthusiasm of the students. Obviously it takes a few sessions to build up a rapport with students, certainly with the special subjects, which goes on for a year. You get a real good relationship with the students where they feel comfortable in sharing their enthusiasm. In terms of lectures, it's much more difficult to tell because essentially you just see faces in a room and you're just talking at them for 45 minutes. I always try and bear in mind that if you sit and try and watch anything for 45 minutes, you tend to glaze over at some point. So I think it's important not to be put off by students who look like they're losing interest. Certainly, I think that's just the nature of a lecture. And this is where I think it's important with student feedback to try and one, to get them to fill out the feedback, but secondly, to take on board things they say, not take offence if they don't think something's working, but work with the feedback to make your course better. In short, yes. I find it very rewarding to hear what they've learned from the lectures and seminars, and obviously towards the end of the course you start to see that they really have a grasp of how imperial history has been written, the main arguments, and they have their own opinions, and I find that it's very rewarding. It's always good when you see a student develop and to take on things that you've told them. So when you start out and they hand you an essay plan or whatever, and you go over it and give them feedback, and then they come back with a really good essay that's taken on board things that shows they've really been interested in the subject, they've gone away and read about it. So that's particularly good, seeing them develop, but also within seminars, so they gain confidence in their own opinions. Specifically if you think about first years who come and often don't really understand how a university essay works, that they need to have their own opinions and arguments about things, and to see them develop into someone who can have their own arguments, have their own opinions and confident in them is particularly rewarding. Well, for this year, it's been the first year that I've been teaching the courses I have, so more time would have been the best thing for me to improve courses, really, because it's been quite a sort of thrown in the deep end, I suppose, and learning as I go. With more familiarity with the courses, and obviously I now have that, certainly bringing things, new things into seminars and lectures will be important things. Objects, working more with things like artworks, other visual sources, videos and things like that, just to diversify the types of things that we're looking at and learning from.